stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit.
Something happened inside Balmoral that was never supposed to leave those walls. William found out, and within hours, the estate was locked down completely. The night everything changed at Balmoral. There are 53,680 acres of Scottish Highland landscape surrounding Balmoral Castle. Ancient woodland, moorland stretching to every horizon, river valleys that have absorbed the private grief and private joy of the British royal family for over 170 years. It is, by every account of people who have spent time within its boundaries, the most genuinely private place the monarchy possesses. Not private in the way that Buckingham Palace is private, shielded from public view by gates and protocol, and the formal apparatus of royal security. Private in the way that only truly remote places can be. Private because the land itself creates a distance from the world that no security perimeter, however sophisticated, could replicate on its own. It is the place the royal family goes when it needs to stop performing and simply exist. It is also, as the events of February 19th, 2026 would make devastatingly clear, the place that someone with sufficient inside knowledge, sufficient planning, and a willingness to take an extraordinary risk had chosen to breach. The security officer who first noticed something was wrong has not been publicly identified. What is known, through sources with direct knowledge of the evening's events, is that he was an experienced member of Balmoral's overnight residential security detail. Not a newcomer, not someone prone to unnecessary alarm, or the kind of hypervigilance that sees threats in ordinary irregularities. A professional with years of estate security experience who had walked the same internal patrol routes enough times to know with absolute certainty when something he was seeing did not match what he expected to see. What he noticed was not dramatic. It was not a broken window, or a triggered alarm, or a visible intruder caught in the beam of a security light. It was a door. Specifically, a door in the corridor connecting the main residential wing to a section of the castle that the estate's internal security classification designated as restricted private access. A section that, in the ordinary course of estate operations, remained sealed when the royal family was not in residence. The door was not open. It was not visibly forced or damaged, but it was not in the precise position that the security officer's last patrol, conducted 3 hours earlier, had left it in. The gap was millimeters, the kind of difference that a camera would struggle to capture and that most human observers would register unconsciously and immediately dismiss. He did not dismiss it. He reported it to his duty supervisor within 10 minutes of noticing it. The supervisor, applying the estate's formal protocol for irregularities in restricted access areas, conducted an immediate personal inspection of the corridor and the sealed section beyond it. What he found when he entered that section is something that sources describe only in the careful, measured language of people who understand exactly how significant what they are about to say actually is. There were signs of disturbance, subtle, deliberate, and in the specific areas of the restricted section where they appeared, deeply significant to anyone with knowledge of what those areas contained and why they were classified the way they were. The supervisor did not escalate through the estate's ordinary reporting chain. He went directly to the head of Balmoral's residential security, bypassing 2 intermediate reporting levels in a manner that the estate's protocol reserves for situations of the most serious concern. That decision, made within 30 minutes of the initial report, tells you precisely how the head of security had characterized what his supervisor was describing to him. This was not a routine irregularity requiring a standard incident report and a morning briefing. This was something that needed to go up the chain immediately, completely, and without the delays that ordinary protocol would introduce. The call reached William's private protection officer at 11:47 in the evening. The protection officer, following his own standing instructions regarding security incidents at royal residential properties, woke William immediately. Sources close to the prince describe his response to the initial briefing as focused and entirely without the disorientation that being woken in the middle of the night might be expected to produce in most people. He asked 4 questions. He received 4 answers. And then he asked the question that his protection officer had been anticipating since the moment he picked up the telephone. He asked whether the restricted section that had been accessed was the one he was thinking of. The protection officer confirmed that it was. And in the silence that followed that confirmation, before William spoke again, and before the chain of decisions that would result in a full estate lockdown was set in motion, there was a moment that sources describe with a consistency that suggests it carried a weight that everyone present felt simultaneously. A moment in which the full implications of what had happened inside Balmoral that night settled over the conversation like something physical. Whatever had been sought inside that restricted section, whoever had sought it, and whatever they had found or failed to find, the simple fact that someone had known it was there and had been willing to breach the most private estate in the British monarchy to reach it, told William something that no security briefing, no palace investigation, and no forensic audit had told him before. The threat was not outside the institution. It had never been outside the institution. Stay with us, because what was found inside that private wing is the detail that transforms this from a security incident into something that strikes at the very heart of the monarchy itself. What was found inside the private wing? Because to understand what the disturbance inside Balmoral's restricted section actually meant, you first have to understand what that section of the castle is, what it contains, and why its existence is known to fewer people than almost any other physical space within the entire royal estate system. Balmoral Castle, as the public understands it, is a Victorian country house built on a scale that reflects the ambitions of Prince Albert, who redesigned it for Queen Victoria in 1852. The public version of Balmoral, the one that appears in photographs and royal documentaries, and the carefully managed media access that the family occasionally permits, presents a place of considerable grandeur but essentially comprehensible domestic proportion. Large rooms, formal reception spaces, residential wings arrange around a central tower, a big house by any ordinary standard, an extraordinary house by most, but fundamentally a house. What the public version does not show, and what almost no public account of Balmoral has ever accurately described, is the section of the castle that was accessed on the night of February 19th, 2026. A restricted private wing that was not part of Albert's original redesign and was not added during any of the publicly documented renovation phases that have been reported across the castle's history. A section whose construction was authorized quietly and without public announcement during the early years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, specifically designed and designated for a purpose that the palace has never formally acknowledged, and that sources familiar with its existence describe only in the most careful and circumspect terms. What the section contains is neat residential accommodation. It is not a storage facility in any ordinary sense of that term. It is, in the description of one source who has direct personal knowledge of its contents, a private institutional archive, a physical repository of materials that Queen Elizabeth considered too sensitive, too personal, and too consequential for the royal archives at Windsor, whose contents are subject to access protocols that, however restricted, involve multiple institutional gatekeepers and the possibility, however remote, of eventual public disclosure. What Elizabeth built at Balmoral was something different, a space subject to no protocol beyond her own personal authority, accessible to no institutional process, known in its full detail only to a small number of people she had chosen personally and trusted absolutely. Now, understand what the security team found when they entered that space in the early hours of February 20th. The disturbance was not random. It was not the evidence of someone who had broken in and searched desperately and broadly for anything of value. It was targeted. Specific areas of the section had been accessed, while others had been left entirely undisturbed. The disturbance pattern, when the security team documented it with the forensic care that the situation demanded, described someone who knew exactly where they were going and exactly what they were looking for. Someone who had a map, not a physical map, but the kind of internal map that only comes from direct personal knowledge of a space and its contents. 3 specific storage areas within the restricted section showed signs of access. The first contained personal correspondence between Queen Elizabeth and a small number of individuals whose identities the palace has not disclosed, but whom sources describe as central figures in the institutional management of the monarchy during specific critical periods of her reign. The second contained what the security team's initial assessment described as sealed personal directives. a category of document that those familiar with the Balmoral archive understood immediately in the context of everything that Princess Anne's court proceedings had already brought to light. And the third, the area that sources say produced the most significant reaction when its disturbance was reported to William, contained something that none of the palace's formal institutional archive systems had ever recorded or cataloged. Something that Elizabeth had kept at Balmoral specifically because she had not wanted it to exist within any system that anyone else could access, query, or trace. What that third area contained is the detail that the palace has been most careful to keep from public knowledge. And it is the detail whose absence or presence in the hands of whoever had accessed the restricted section that night carried implications that extended far beyond any single legal proceeding, any single asset dispute, or any single institutional confrontation. Sources who have been briefed on the contents describe it only in terms of its significance rather than its specific nature. One source, choosing words with obvious and deliberate care, said simply that what was stored in that third area represented the difference between the succession proceeding, as Elizabeth had designed it, and the succession being vulnerable to a challenge that nobody currently has the legal standing to make, but that somebody, with the right documents in their possession, would acquire overnight. Think about what that means. Somebody had been inside Balmoral's most private space. Somebody had known it existed and known what it contained. Somebody had accessed the three most consequential storage areas within it, with a precision that spoke of planning, of inside knowledge, and of a specific objective that they had been working toward for long enough to understand exactly where to look and exactly how little time they had to find it. Whether they had found what they were looking for was the question that William needed answered before anything else. And the answer to that question, when it came back from the security team's initial assessment, produced a response from William that those present describe as the most controlled expression of urgency they had ever witnessed. He did not raise his voice. He did not display the visible agitation that the situation would have justified in almost anyone else. He simply said 4 words to his protection officer that set the entire lockdown in motion. 4 words that told everyone in that room that William understood exactly what was at stake and was not going to allow another minute to pass without acting on that understanding. Stay with us, because who was behind the breach and how they got inside is where this story becomes truly extraordinary. The suspicious activity and who was behind it. The question that William's security team faced in the hours following the discovery was not simply who had been inside Balmoral's restricted wing, it was how. Because the how in this particular case was in many ways more alarming than the who. Balmoral's residential security system is not the kind of infrastructure that yields to opportunistic intrusion. It had been comprehensively upgraded following Queen Elizabeth's death in 2022, a process overseen personally by William as part of his assumption of responsibility for the estate's management. The external perimeter, the internal access controls, the residential wing monitoring systems, all of it had been redesigned with the explicit intention of creating a security architecture that reflected the estate's significance as a private royal residence rather than its previous configuration as a country house with enhanced protection. Getting inside the restricted section without triggering that system required one of 2 things. Either a level of technical sophistication that pointed toward resources well beyond any individual acting alone, or something considerably simpler and considerably more disturbing, a key. The forensic security review commissioned by William in the hours following the lockdown order focused first on the access point. The door that the overnight officer had noticed was not a door that appeared in any of the estate's publicly documented floor plans. Its existence was known to the security team, to a small number of senior estate staff, and to members of the royal family with residential access to Balmoral. The locking mechanism had not been forced. There was no evidence of technical interference with the electronic components of the broader security system in the corridor surrounding it. The door had been opened with physical knowledge of its location and a means of bypassing its specific locking mechanism that the forensic team's assessment described as consistent with either direct prior access or detailed instruction from someone with direct prior access. That conclusion narrowed the field of possible individuals dramatically, and when William's security team began cross-referencing the narrowed field against the estate's visitor and staff access records for the preceding 6 months, a pattern emerged that produced the kind of silence in the room that only genuinely unexpected information generates.
3 individuals with documented access to the restricted sections corridor during that 6-month period had also, according to communications records obtained as part of the review,
an extraordinary house by most, but fundamentally a house. What the public version does not show, and what almost no public account of Balmoral has ever accurately described,
been in contact with a party outside the palace whose identity the security team flagged immediately for William's personal attention.
Not a foreign intelligence service, not a criminal enterprise. Something that William's team found, in certain respects, considerably more troubling than either of those things. A private legal entity whose recent incorporation, whose documented connections to commercial interests with a stake in specific royal assets, and whose apparent relationship to the network already identified through Princess Anne's court proceedings, placed it at the intersection of every significant institutional threat the monarchy had been navigating simultaneously across the preceding months. The connection was not circumstantial. Communications recovered during the review showed that one of the 3 individuals with corridor access had been in direct contact with representatives of the legal entity on 4 separate occasions between November of 2025 and February of 2026. The final communication had occurred 36 hours before the breach. 36 hours. The timing was not coincidental, and William's security team did not treat it as such. What those communications contained has not been fully disclosed, but sources familiar with their recovered content describe the final exchange as containing information specific enough about the restricted section's layout and contents to constitute, in the assessment of the security team's lead analyst's operational briefing material. Someone with inside knowledge of Balmoral's most private space had provided detailed guidance to a party with clear motivation to access it. And that party, or someone acting on their behalf, had used that guidance 36 hours later. The identity of the individual with corridor access who had provided that guidance landed on William's desk in the early afternoon of February 20th. He read the name. He read it again. And then, according to the single source with knowledge of that moment, he set the document down with the particular deliberateness of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed that they had genuinely hoped would not be. Because the name was not a stranger's. It was not an outsider who had somehow infiltrated the estate's trust structure. It was someone whose presence inside Balmoral's innermost circle had been entirely unremarkable. Until now. Stay with us, because what William did next, and who he confronted, is where this story reaches its most extraordinary point. William's lockdown, order, and what it actually meant. No. The lockdown order was issued at 2:17 in the morning of February 20th, 2026, not as a reactive measure born from panic or the disorientation of being woken in the middle of the night, with news that nobody wanted to deliver, as a precise, deliberately calibrated institutional response that William had been developing the framework for long before that night's events made it necessary. Those who have watched him manage the Duchy of Cornwall, execute the removal of Annabel Elliot from the payroll, block Camilla's access to discretionary funds, and support his father's decision to strip the Queen Consort of her titles, those people would have recognized immediately the quality of what William produced in those early morning hours. It had the same signature, quiet, complete, and constructed in a way that left no gap through which a reversal could be argued or a challenge mounted. The lockdown had 4 distinct components, each targeting a specific vulnerability that the breach had exposed. The first was physical. All non-essential access to Balmoral's residential and restricted sections was suspended with immediate effect. Estate staff, whose duties did not require residential access, were reassigned to external operations until further notice. The small number of individuals with documented access to the restricted wings corridor were placed under what the palace's security framework describes as supervised movement protocol, a formal restriction that limits an individual's freedom of movement within an estate without constituting the kind of detention that would require external legal authorization. They were not arrested. They were not accused of anything formally. They were simply and very deliberately prevented from leaving or communicating freely until William's team had completed its initial assessment. The second component targeted communications. All external communications from Balmoral's internal staff network were suspended, pending a review of the contact records that the forensic security assessment had flagged. Personal devices belonging to individuals in the supervised movement category were secured by the security team under a protocol that Williams' legal advisors had confirmed was consistent with the estate's private employment terms. What those devices contained and what the communications review subsequently recovered is information that sources say significantly expanded the security team's understanding of how long the planning behind the breach had actually been underway. The third component was the one that sent the most immediate shockwaves through the palace's broader institutional structure. William issued a formal notification to the keeper of the privy purse and to the palace's head of legal affairs that Balmoral's estate access authorizations were under comprehensive review and that all existing access credentials for the estate were suspended pending reissuance under a new authorization framework. Every credential, every level of access, suspended simultaneously and without exception. The practical consequence of that notification was that individuals whose access to Balmoral had been treated as a permanent feature of their institutional relationship with the Crown discovered, without warning and without prior consultation, that their ability to enter the estate had been formally revoked. The fourth component is the one that those closest to the situation describe as the most revealing indicator of how seriously William assessed what had happened. He contacted Princess Anne directly, not his father, not the palace communications team, Anne. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. What was said between them has not been disclosed. But within 3 hours of that call ending, Anne's own legal team had been notified of developments at Balmoral and had begun assessing the connection between the breach and the network already under examination through her ongoing court proceedings. The two investigations, Anne's legal action over the missing Royal Archive documents and William's security response to the Balmoral breach, had just become one. And whoever had believed they were operating across two separate fronts was about to discover that the ground between those fronts had just collapsed entirely beneath them. Stay with us, because the confrontation that followed is unlike anything the palace has seen in living memory. The confrontation nobody expected. The name on William's desk connected everything. That is the detail that sources with knowledge of the investigation describe as the moment the entire picture snapped into focus. Not just the Balmoral breach, not just the missing Royal Archive documents that Anne's court proceedings had already placed into the public record. Everything. The financial irregularities identified in the January audit, the unauthorized communications documented in Charles's palace investigation, the commercial legal entities incorporated in offshore jurisdictions, the heritage law consultations, the network of individuals whose interests converge around a single objective that had been in preparation, sources now believe, for considerably longer than anyone inside the palace had previously understood. The individual identified through the communications review was not the senior official at the center of Anne's court proceedings. An extraordinary house by most, but fundamentally, a house. What the public version does not show, and what almost no public account of Balmoral has ever accurately described, it was someone else. Someone whose institutional position had placed them at the intersection of multiple palace operations simultaneously, and whose access to sensitive information across several distinct areas of royal household management had made them, in retrospect, the most consequential single point of vulnerability in the entire security architecture that William had been carefully constructing around the monarchy's most sensitive assets. William requested a meeting. The request was delivered through formal channels, which in itself communicated something significant to the person receiving it. A formal meeting request from the Prince of Wales, delivered in writing through the palace's official internal communication system, rather than through the personal aide-to-aide contact that characterizes ordinary royal household household interactions carries a weight that everyone inside that institution understands immediately. It means the conversation that follows will be documented. It means positions taken and statements made will be recorded. It means this is not a private family discussion that can be subsequently reframed or denied. It is an institutional confrontation with institutional consequences. The meeting took place in William's private study at Windsor Castle on the afternoon of February 22nd, 2026, 3 days after the breach, long enough for the communications review to be sufficiently complete to give William everything he needed, short enough that the individual in question had not yet understood the full scope of what the review had recovered. Sources with knowledge of what passed between them describe the exchange in terms that convey both its brevity and its finality. William presented the communications evidence. He outlined the connection to the Balmoral breach. He described the relationship between the individual's access history and the specific areas of the restricted section that had been disturbed. He did not raise his voice. He did not deploy the kind of emotional register that the situation might have justified, and that would have given the other person something to respond to deflect, to argue against. He was, according to sources, entirely and deliberately clinical, presenting documented facts in sequence, leaving space after each one, and allowing the accumulating weight of the evidence to do what no emotional confrontation could do as effectively: make denial impossible. The individual did not deny it. What they offered instead, sources say, was something that William had not anticipated, and that those briefed on the exchange describe as the most significant single disclosure of the entire investigation. They did not act alone. The network behind the Balmoral breach and the missing documents was larger than William's security team had yet established. There were individuals still inside the palace, still operating with full institutional access and full institutional trust, who had been part of the planning from its earliest stages. And at least one of those individuals occupied a position close enough to the monarchy's innermost operational circle that their continued undetected presence represented a vulnerability that the lockdown, comprehensive as it was, had not yet addressed. William ended the meeting. He walked directly to his secure telephone, and he made a call that sources describe only as the call that changed the investigation entirely. Stay with us, because what was being sought inside Balmoral and why it threatens the succession itself is the chapter that makes every other detail in this story finally make sense. What was being sought and why? It threatens the succession itself. Everything that has unfolded across this story, the breach, the lockdown, the communications review, the confrontation in William's private study, has been building toward a single question. The question that William asked his protection officer in the middle of the night when the call first reached him. The question that the security team's initial assessment could not fully answer. The question that the individual in that Windsor Castle meeting had partially answered before William ended the conversation and reached for his secure telephone. What was being sought inside Balmoral's restricted wing, and why was it significant enough to justify the extraordinary risk of breaching the most privately secured estate in the British monarchy? The answer begins, as so many answers in this story do, with Queen Elizabeth II. In the final years of her reign, as her health declined and the weight of unresolved succession complexities pressed more urgently against the formal legal arrangements her advisors were preparing, Elizabeth made a decision that only a handful of living people have ever been told about. She commissioned the preparation of a document, not a will, not a covenant trust, not a sealed directive of the kind that had already been placed in the royal archives and the Balmoral private collection. Something older in its constitutional form, and more absolute in its legal authority. A sovereign instrument of succession clarification, drafted under a constitutional mechanism that has existed within British royal law since the 16th century, and that carries, when properly executed by a reigning monarch, a legal weight that supersedes ordinary testamentary arrangements and cannot be challenged through any standard probate or inheritance proceeding. The instrument addressed a specific question about the line of succession that Elizabeth had watched become increasingly complicated across the final decade of her reign, a question whose answer, if left undocumented, created a legal ambiguity that someone with sufficient resources, sufficient legal expertise, and sufficient motivation could exploit to mount a challenge to the current succession arrangements that the courts would be constitutionally obliged to consider seriously. She had answered that question, definitively, legally, and in a form that placed her answer beyond the reach of any subsequent challenge. And she had stored that instrument in the third area of Balmoral's restricted section. An extraordinary house by most, but fundamentally, a house. The area whose disturbance had produced the most significant reaction from William when the security team's report reached him. The network behind the breach had known it was there. They had known what it contained, and what its continued secure existence meant for the challenge they had been preparing. Without it, the ambiguity they intended to exploit remained legally viable. With it in Elizabeth's own hand and properly authenticated, their challenge had no foundation. They had not been trying to steal a historical document. They had been trying to remove the single most consequential legal obstacle standing between their network and a challenge to the British succession that would have triggered a constitutional crisis without modern precedent. William's security team confirmed on March 1st, 2026, that the instrument had not been removed. The breach had been interrupted, either by the security officer's discovery or by a failure of timing in the operation itself before the third storage area had been fully accessed. Elizabeth's sovereign instrument of succession clarification remained exactly where she had placed it, intact, authenticated, and now under a protection framework that William had personally redesigned in the 72 hours following the lockdown order. The network had failed. The document was safe. The succession was protected. But the individuals still operating inside the palace with full institutional access, the ones the confronted individual had disclosed in William's private study, had not yet been identified and removed. That investigation, sources confirm, is ongoing. The lockdown at Balmoral has been lifted. The estate is open, but William is watching. Every access, every communication, every movement, he is watching. And this time, nobody inside that institution should make the mistake of assuming he will not find them. He always does.